that as a self-defeating statement, ladies and gentlemen? All right, very good. Let's summarize the truth about truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true, but everything can't be true. I mean, you can believe the earth is flat if you want. That doesn't mean it is. And objective truths can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says there are no objective truths. What should you say to them? Well, use the word. Say, is that an objective truth? If they say it is, it defeats itself. If they say it isn't, if it's just their subjective opinion, then why should anyone believe it? So you can't get around objective truth. The key question now is it objectively true that God exists? And that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time here tonight on. Does God exist? So in a strange way, we've both rescued the Bible and, say, Richard Dawkins by answering yes to question 1. And if our logic is good here, this means that relativism and postmodernism are false. Because they violate the law of non-contradiction. They make truth claims that there are no truth claims. But let's see what is true then. Does God exist? Now, whenever you talk about God, you've got to define your terms. What we're going to talk about here is a theistic God. What's a theistic God? A theistic God is a being who's beyond the world and created the world and sustains the world, but he is not the world. A theistic God is sort of like a painter is to a painting. Michelangelo paints the painting, his attributes are expressed in the painting, but Michelangelo is not the painting. The worldview that believes God is the creation, or the painter is the painting, is called pantheism. In fact, you can pour most world religions into one of these three worldviews. You see the hands under the world here on the left? That's theism. God made all. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all theistic world religions. God made all. You see the hand in the world there? That's called pantheism. God is all. Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and the New Age are all pantheistic. You know Zen Buddhism. Use the Force, Luke. The whole Star Wars series is pantheism. There's a good force and a bad force, but it's not personal. And there's no theistic God. Everything's God. I'm God, you're God, the trees are God, the chairs are God, everything's God. The last worldview is called atheism. No God at all. You don't see a hand at all, you just see a world. Religious humanists would be considered atheists. Now, I'm here to say that everybody is religious if you define religion as someone's explanation for how we got here and where we're going. Richard Dawkins has some ideas there. I'm here to say also that everyone's a fundamentalist. You say, I thought just Christians and maybe Muslims are no, everyone's a fundamentalist. Oh, we have different fundamentals. Richard Dawkins has fundamental things he believes in. He believes that we got here through some cosmic accident, that there is no ultimate end to this world or us. We're just going to become worm food. He believes there is no objective morality, even though in his own book, The God Delusion, after saying there's no objective morality, he gives his own 10 commandments. Does anyone see the irony here? And I'm here to say that everyone has faith. Now, I'm using faith in the sense that Richard Dawkins would use it. He says if you don't have evidence, you have faith. Well, I think that the Christian worldview has a lot of evidence behind it, and therefore you just need a little bit of faith to believe it, using Richard Dawkins' definition. I think the opposite is true with atheism. I think there's maybe a little evidence that might point to the fact that there is no God, but I think there's a lot of evidence that says there is a God, therefore you need a lot more faith to be an atheist. Now, we're going to now give evidence for theism. And in the book, there are three major arguments we deal with. There are other arguments, but these are the three we're going to look at. First, from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is from design, known as the teleological argument. Greek word telos, which means design or purpose. It says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments are scientific in nature. You can get evidence for these arguments by either looking through a telescope or looking into a microscope, which we will do. However, the argument's not scientific at all. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it's the argument we've intuitively understood since we were very small children. It's the argument from morality, known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, really objectively wrong, then there has to be a God. What do we mean by morally wrong? Like, it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to kill 6 million Jews in a Holocaust. Why do you need God for that? Because if there is no God, that's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. I mean, if there's no standard beyond humanity, that's just two opinions going at one another. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's start with the cosmological argument. And this is the argument that many say points to the big... Now, some people are going to say, you know, Frank, we're Christians in here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. The evidence for the Big Bang is indeed quite good. You even have atheistic scientists admitting, for example, like Stephen Hawking saying almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tries to come up with a crazy theory to tell us how we got here, but he admits that the universe had a beginning. Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist, put it this way: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there are two interesting words here in this quote I want to bring your attention to. The word proof. Very unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Normally they say the evidence points to, the evidence suggests. Remember, science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. But Vilenkin seems to think the evidence is so strong, he's saying, man, this is proof. Then he looks over here at the other word is the word problem. Why is there a problem if there's a cosmic beginning? Because it gets too close to the G word. We don't want to go there. In fact, Einstein himself didn't want to go there, which is why Einstein, when he discovered general relativity, did what a third grader wouldn't do mathematically in order to avoid an absolute beginning. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, what is the evidence that is having these scientists admitting that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing? This is just scientific evidence now. It's in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. This is all from Chapter 3 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I'm just going to list it here. We'll go through it quickly. There's a lot more detail in the book. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. The R stands for the radiation afterglow. The G stands for the great galaxy seeds, and E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. I'll explain each one of these as we go. We'll with the second law of thermodynamics, which says the universe is running down. It's running out of energy. As time goes on, the amount of usable energy in the universe is being depleted. You say, so what? How does this show the universe had a beginning? Well, let me ask you a question. Suppose we were to take a flashlight, turn it on right here on this table, and then leave and come back tomorrow night. What would be the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight tomorrow night? Weak, if not dead, right? Why? Because there's only so much juice in those batteries, and the longer the flashlight's on, the less power you have, right? You say, okay, well, what if the flashlight was turned on an infinitely long time ago? Would there be any light coming out of it right now? No. How does this relate to the universe? Well, think of the universe as having batteries. If the universe was turned on an infinitely long time ago, there would be no sun burning right now. There'd be no stars. There'd be no light. There'd be no energy. But we still have light. We still have a sun. We still have stars, which implies the universe had a beginning. By the way, this is also called the law of entropy, that things go to disorder as time goes on. Second law of thermodynamics is why you got to replace the carpet in this room, because things wear out. It's why you got to put gas in your car, because you run out of energy. The second law of thermodynamics even affects us personally. When you get older, it's the reason you get dresser disease. That's when your chest falls into your drawers. Okay? It's corny, I know. But the Bible says, if the Bible's true, in Romans 8 it says that the creation is in bondage to decay, but then you read in the last chapters of Revelation that a new heaven and new earth will be created, and the second law will have no effect on us. You can put the law of entropy this way. Nature will take a building and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. Now, why do we still have order in the universe? The reason we still have order is because the universe was created a finite time ago. So the universe had a beginning. Now, the U in SURGE stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Does anyone know who this guy is right here? That is Edwin Hubble, who now has a telescope named after him. And back in the 1930s, they thought it was cool to have your picture taken with a pipe, apparently. But Hubble was using the 100-inch telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California in 1929 when he noticed that all the galaxies out there were moving away from us. Which implied, and how do you know this? The redshift in the light. If the light was blue, it would have been that the galaxies were collapsing on us, but they're all moving away. So Hubble deduced if the galaxies are here right now, tomorrow they'll be here, and the day after that they'll be here. If we go back in time, all matter in the universe would collapse back to a point, not the size of a basketball, not the size of a pinhead, but mathematically it collapses back to nothing. So if you go all the way back into time, the universe collapses back to nothing. In other words, the universe came from nothing spatial, temporal, or physical. That has implications we'll talk about in a minute. But the good scientific theories often predict future discoveries. As early as 1948 said, we think the universe began in a great explosion, which is why atheist Fred Hoyle said, what are you going to say? It was some sort of Big Bang? He used it as a derisive term, but the term stuck. And scientists were saying, yeah, we think it was a Big Bang. And you know what? There should be some remnant heat from the Big Bang still left over. But nobody bothered to look for it until two scientists working at Bell Labs in Holmdel, New Jersey, discovered it by accident. That's Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, which leads us to the R, the radiation afterglow. This is literally the smoking gun from the Big Bang. They found this radiation afterglow just a couple above absolute zero everywhere out there in the universe. And agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow said this radiation afterglow has convinced the last doubting Thomas that the universe had a beginning. There was a theory for many years called the steady state theory, that the universe was static and eternal, didn't have a beginning. Jastrow said after that, after the smoking gun had been discovered, you can't believe that anymore. What is radiation afterglow? Remnant heat. Example. You ever watch one of those old tube TVs at night with the lights out? What do you see when you turn the TV off? You see a glow coming off the TV, right? That's radiation afterglow. There's still radiation afterglow coming off the universe. These guys discovered it, and they won Nobel Prizes in 1978 for discovering it. Now, as I mentioned, good scientific theories predict future discoveries. Scientists thought that there should be very fine temperature variations in that radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. But they had no way of measuring these temperature variations from Earth. They were going to have to put a satellite up to do so, which leads us to the G in SURGE, the great galaxy seeds. They had a satellite ready to go. They were going to put it up on the space shuttle in the early 1980s or the mid-1980s. Then in 1986, the Challenger exploded off the launching pad. They had no way to get the satellite up, so they redesigned the entire satellite. They made it half its original size. In 1989, they put it on a French Titan rocket and put it into orbit. It circled the Earth for 3 years taking measurements. They needed 3 years' worth of measurements to be sure that they had what they were looking for. Finally, in 1992, they announced their results. And the satellite they used was called COBE, Cosmic Background Explorer. What they found were temperature variations that were down in 100,000. The leader of the expedition, this man, George Smoot, who taught at UCal Berkeley, put it this way. Smoot said, we found the machining marks of the Creator. He said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. That was the headline, Time Magazine, May 1992. He won Nobel Prize for this in 2006. Stephen Hawking, on the cover of Smoot's book, said the scientific discovery of the century, if not all time. Maybe he's overstating the case a little bit, but he's a cosmologist, so that's what he's saying. Now, what does this say about Darwinism? Nothing. But I always hear, or not always, but a lot of times I hear atheists saying, look, if Darwinism's true, you don't need God. That's nonsense. Why? Biology comes well after cosmology. Before you can ever get to biology, you need a universe. You need a designer at the very beginning of the universe to create the universe and design it in such a way for us to be here. So even if Darwinism is 100% true, I don't think it is, but even if it's 100% true, you still need a creator and designer at the very beginning. Now the E in SURGE stands for Einstein, and Einstein knew that his theory of general relativity back in 1916 showed beyond any reasonable doubt that space-time and matter were correlative, that they came into existence together, that space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. But Einstein did not like it. In fact, he called his general relativity theory irritating, to which agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow later said, irritating? That's strangely emotional language for a discussion about some mathematical formulas. Why did he find it irritating? because it pointed to a beginning, and he didn't want a beginning, because he didn't want to imply a beginner. So you know what the great Einstein did? The great Einstein put a fudge factor into his equations called the cosmological constant. It's a counterforce to gravity. He didn't want this. Einstein wanted this, a static and eternal universe. So he needed a counterforce to gravity. And so in order to get this counterforce, you know what the great Einstein did? The great Einstein divided by 0. Now what are you told in 3rd grade? Never divide by 0. You can go straight to hell for that. Only Chuck Norris can divide by 0, right? Well, mathematicians in the 1920s are looking at Einstein's equations going, Al, you can't divide by 0. You got an error. Your original equations appeared to be right. Well, in 1929, Hubble discovers the expanding universe, which is exactly what Einstein's theory of general relativity originally predicted. So he invites Einstein out to Mount Wilson to see the redshift for himself. And in 1931, Einstein goes out to Mount Wilson and he looks through Hubble's telescope. In fact, who's that right behind him? That's Hubble. You see the light? After he got off the telescope, sometime later, he said, I now see the necessity of a beginning. He said, the cosmological constant was the greatest mistake in my professional career. The universe did have a beginning. All I'm interested now is to find the mind of God. The rest are details. Now, Einstein was not a Christian. He denied being an atheist. He also denied being a pantheist. He may have been like a deist or something. We're not exactly sure. But Einstein's theory, which has been found accurate to more than 5 decimal points, in fact, about every month you see an article, general relativity proven again. His theory proves beyond any reasonable doubt that space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. In fact, if you were to say to Al, I don't think the universe had a beginning, you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably do this. Now, all this evidence led this man, the man I've been talking about, Robert Jastrow, in 1978 to write a book. He is the founder of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. He sat in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in until about 4 years ago when he died at the age of 82. He was at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena. In 1978, he wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. On page 1, he says, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. In other words, I don't know whether God exists or not. But here's what he went on to say on page 14. The astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. He then went on in an interview to say this. Oh, by the way, that's an actual picture of the Hubble Space Telescope. I mean, of the Saturn from the Hubble Space Telescope. That's not a painting. That's Saturn in infrared. Here's what Jastrow said. He said, astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, and they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Wait. Why would an agnostic astronomer say it's scientific that supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature create the universe? Because there was no nature. Nature was the effect. It can't be the cause. Nature was created, so it must be something beyond nature that brought it into existence. If space, time, and matter were created, it would imply that the cause must transcend space, time, and matter. In other words, it must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Now, I was at the University of Michigan. It's about time you guys caught up. Last year, and an atheist during the Q&A stood up and said, Frank, I think this is a God of the gaps argument. What's a God of the gaps argument? That's when you don't have a natural explanation for something, so you plug God into the gap in your knowledge, and later on you find out it really was a natural explanation, and you look stupid for plugging God in the gap of your knowledge. I said, no, John, this is not a God of the gaps argument. He said, oh, no. Give science enough time, and we'll find a natural cause. I said, John, you will never find a natural cause for all of nature. In fact, to say that given enough time, you'll find a natural cause for all of nature would be like me saying, give me enough time and I'll figure out that I gave birth to my own mother. Okay? You will not find it. The cause must be beyond nature. By the way, it wasn't just Jastrow who said these things. Every one of these gentlemen won Nobel Prizes in physics for discovering evidence that the universe had a beginning. We'll start with Arno Penzias, who said, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. Robert Wilson, who believed in the steady state theory until he helped discover the radiation afterglow, put it this way. Certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. And George Smoot, the guy who taught at Berkeley, said there's no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Now, if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's the only question I have is, which view is more reasonable? Is it that no one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing? At Texas A&M last year, one atheist said, oh, I think number 1 is more reasonable. I said, number 1? Let's take a look at number 2 first. Number 2 says, someone created something out of nothing. Now that is a miracle. But at least you have someone to do the miracles. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. That seems to be absurd. Oh, you can ask who made God if you want. During the Q&A we can talk about that. But to say that no one created something out of nothing, that flies in the face of the law of causality, which says that everything that comes to be has a cause. It doesn't say everything has a cause. God doesn't have to have a cause if he's eternal, right? But everything that comes to be has a cause. If the universe came to be, it must have a cause. If you want to do away with that principle, then you got to do away with all science. Why? Because that's what science does. It looks for causes. So I said to the guy at Texas A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing without a cause, there is no one sitting here in this room right now that is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing in your dorm room and is currently defecating on the carpet. You don't think that way, because you know things don't happen. We don't worry, as we're talking right now, a Bengal tiger is going to appear out of nothing and start devouring people. We know that every effect must have a cause. In fact, here's a good question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Or if there is no God, why does anything exist? If the atheist says, well, the universe has always been here, then I would say, search. The evidence points to the fact that it hasn't always been here. By the way, there's one other line of evidence we haven't discussed. It's more philosophical in nature. Some call it the Kalam cosmological argument, and it says this, that there could be a finite number of moments before today, because if there were an infinite number of moments before today, today never would have gotten here. Because you can't traverse an infinite number of moments. Only Chuck Norris can, he's done it twice. But you can't traverse an infinite number of moments. So there can only be a finite number of moments before today, which means the universe, or time itself, had to have a beginning. Now, you say, well, wait a minute, how do atheists respond to this evidence? Well, let's take a look at what Richard Dawkins says, the greatest atheist, or the most well-known atheist anyway, in the world today. How many have read Dawkins' book, The God Delusion? Anyone look at The God Delusion? A couple of us, a few of us? Okay. Dawkins is a great writer. You got to love the way Dawkins writes, because he is very gifted in that regard. But he sums up his book on pages 157 and 158. And here's what he says in the book. The appearance of design is overwhelming. I haven't really talked much about design. That's the next argument, but except for the great galaxy seeds. But Dawkins is already agreeing. It looks design. My question to Dawkins is, if it appears design, is it possible it is? The second point he makes is there's no explanation for this in physics. Why is it so designed? In fact, during one of the debates he had with John Lennox, somebody from the audience asked Dawkins a question. The question was, Dr. Dawkins, where did the laws of physics come from? And Dawkins said, I have no idea. But bringing God into it doesn't help. Well, I actually think bringing God into it does help. Why? Why is the world so orderly? Why can we predict what's going to happen? I just saw a thing on the Drudge Report today. A meteor is going to hit here in 2040. Did you hear about this? Possible meteor strike on Earth. How do we know that? Because the world's predictable. Because natural laws are so precise. That appears to be the product of a mind, not the product of randomness. In fact, you wouldn't even know what random was unless you knew what order was. There appears to be an orderer out there. This appears to be the product of a mind, not the product of randomness. Now, here's Dawkins' explanation for how we got here. And I'm not making this up. You can go check the book out for yourself. Here's how we got here according to Dawkins. Maybe the multi-universe theory, which relies on, what word is that right there? Luck. Now, is luck a cause? Even if you're Irish, is luck a cause? No, luck is not a cause. Luck is a word we use to cover our ignorance. Imagine you're debating Dawkins and he says, what evidence do you have that God exists? And you say, well, Dr. Dawkins, I don't have any evidence, but I do have luck. What do you think he'd say? Man, what a great argument. You nailed me. Then he goes on to say who made God, which does not help him. In fact, let's deal with that during the Q&A if you're interested. You say, what about Christopher Hitchens? Who, I love Christopher Hitchens. I debated him twice. You can see our debates on our website, crossexamine.org, for free. Tragically, Hitchens just died about 2.5 months ago. Everybody loves Hitchens. Whether you agree with him or not, he was just kind of a guy you could listen to all day, even if you didn't agree with him. And very verbally fluent, British accent, brilliant, you know. Anyway, this is a picture from our second debate. Hitchens wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. He has less than 9 pages on metaphysics. What's metaphysics? Ultimate reality, things beyond the physical, God. Less than 9 pages he deals with the arguments for God. He just dismisses them. But in those 9 pages, here's what he says. The Big Bang is the accepted theory of the origins of the universe. He agrees with all the surge evidence. Then he says that the theory works without God, but he never says how. So in our second debate, I had an opportunity to ask him a question. I was standing over here, he was standing over there. We had a moderator between us. I said, Christopher, all the evidence points to the fact that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing, which would imply the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. You're a materialist, material things. So, how do you explain the universe coming into existence out of nothing from an atheistic perspective? And he said, after a long joke that went, he said, the philosopher Laplace had no room in his model of the universe for God. Laplace was a philosopher, an atheist who lived about 200 years ago. I said, Christopher, what does Laplace have to do with this? The evidence today, particularly from physics, shows that the universe had a beginning out of nothing. What's your atheistic explanation for this? And Hitchens said, I am not a physicist. And you are not going to get people here to agree with you either. All of his people who were for him were clapping. Now, the moderator did not give me a chance to go back at him. If he had, I would have said, Christopher, because you're not a physicist, does that mean you can ignore all the evidence from physics? I mean, imagine you're a crime scene investigator, and you find a body with bullet holes in it, and there's a note taped to it. And you pick the note off the body, and it's in French. Can you go, I don't read French, and throw the evidence away? No! If you don't know physics, find somebody who does. I mean, I could have easily said, I'm not an atheist, so I don't have to consider any of your evidence. No, that's not the way you need to do things. You need to consider all the evidence. Hitchens goes on to say who made God as well, which again does not help his case. You say, look, Hitchens was not a scientist, he was a journalist. Give me a scientific source here. A popular scientific source on how we got here, National Geographic, check this out. Self-generating universes, multiple universes grow like branches from a tree trunk in a model that allows the universe to create itself. Hello, McFly. Can you create yourself? You can't create. You have to exist prior to creating anything. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let some graphic artist down at National Geographic draw some sort of demented French horn to get me to believe how we got here. You know, one scientist in the article was very honest. He said, it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. Now, all this data left this man again, Robert Jastrow, the agnostic astronomer, to end his book this way. And this is worth the price of the book. This is the last line in the book before the appendices. Here's how Jastrow, the agnostic, sums it up. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the high although the final rock he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. Now, I can't see any good reason why we ought not be teaching this surge evidence in our government school system. Did I say anything about the reason we believe this is true is because the Bible says so? Now I'm saying it's congruent with the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know it. It's just evidence. Just let the kids decide what they do with the evidence. You can't force anybody to worship anybody anyway. You can only give belief that. You can't give belief in. You can just say, here's the evidence. You decide what to do with it. You know, the Greeks who knew all this stuff, not the science, but they knew there had to be an unmoved mover, they never got their philosophy and religion together. Aristotle never worshipped the unmoved mover. He just knew there had to be one. So just provide kids with the evidence and let them decide. I mean, our country is founded on the idea that there are self-evident truths. And what are they? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now that's the cosmological argument. More in the book. We've got to move to the design argument, teleological argument. And this is the argument William Paley made popular when he said, if you found this watch in the woods, would you think it was made by natural law? You're just skipping along, you see a diamond-studded Rolex, you pick it up, you go, I don't need to turn this in the wind and the rain.